Hey, I'm Jeff with Screens Atlanta, and I'm here to show you today how to assemble a knockdown window screen. Getting a knockdown window screen from Screens Atlanta will require assembly. So it will come in a tube or a box similar to this, and we'll have all the components necessary in order for you to build your window screen. The mesh, obviously, that you'll need for your window screen. You will come with pre-cut to size as you've ordered it frame. You will come with your spline and any hardware that you've ordered. You need to be very careful if you have multiple screens or screen sizes that are very close in the width and the length. You'll notice on here, you will have your finish size, but your cut size will be slightly less than your finish size. The reason for that is your corner keys take up some width and height. Actual cut size will be less to compensate for your corner key. First thing you're going to do is assemble your screen frame. And if you notice, we will put in corner keys on some of the pieces, but the corner key and the profile of the metal have to match along with what is called the spline groove. The profile has a particular edge to it that will fit the corner key, and the corner key and the pieces of metal all have a spline groove that will all hook together. And you just slide that in. After you assemble your screen frame, you have to be careful to look at your gaps or where your corner keys match. If there's big gaps there, it will change the size of your window screen. Make sure to push by hand or use a rubber mallet to try to close those gaps. This gap will be here because there is a hardware there, your tension spring, and that creates a little bit of that gap, which we will have already taken into account in your measurement. An important part of making your window screen is to keep it rectangular. You want to keep your screen frame rectangular, because if it doesn't, you will start to what's called hourglass, and your measurements at the corners will be different than the ones in the middle. I just get little small blocks with a nail on it. The thickness of the block needs to be no bigger than the thickness of the screen frame so it doesn't stick out. What I'm going to do is block that in to keep that rectangular shape. Now that the frame is done, you want to take measurements just to make sure that you're, again, rectangular from here to here, in the middle, on the sides, and on the width. It's probably a good idea just to make sure that everything is blocked properly. Now you take your mesh and lay it over, making sure that you've got plenty of mesh on the height and the width. Make sure that you don't have it turned incorrectly. Now we're ready to put the hardware in before we put the mesh in. You had slip-on springs on the top, which we already put in when you ordered it. And now we have pull tabs that go on the bottom. They came in a bag independently. They have a groove in them, which is going to fit into the spline groove and allow the spline to roll over the top of them. And you have to put these down before you put the mesh, because they will ride under the mesh and the spline will hold them. So you'll put one in each side. Now we've got our pull tabs underneath the mesh and into the spline groove. The spline will then go on top of the mesh and hold the pull tab in place. Now we're going to roll the mesh in with a tool. This is our hardware tool. It has a concave wheel in it. The importance of the concave wheel is that it rolls the spline into place. You can get this at a hardware store or one very similar to this. This is the spline. You put the spline into the corner. I always start on the bottom left, and you push it into that corner. And you don't want to apply a lot of tension, because tension was going to create problems with your mesh. So now you just want to be as straight as you can in rolling your mesh. When you go to this, any hardware you have, it's a little bit harder because you're pushing the hardware down into. Now I'm not pulling on this mesh. I'm just kind of holding it in place and trying to keep it straight. And if I don't do that, it's going to run in an angle. And if you look, it's fairly clean here. I don't have no mesh here and a bunch of mesh up here, because then everything's going to be torqued. It's fairly straight. Very important to get this first edge straight. You got to make this turn. I just kind of loop that around, and then I try to dig into this side over here. And now I've got my edge. As I come up this side, all I want to do is just make sure that my spline is up. Again, I'm not going to pull on the spline. I'm just trying to keep the spline straight. I'm going to not pull on the mesh. I'm going to leave it alone. And you can tell I don't have any tension on the mesh or the spline. I'm going to come up here. And again, same thing on this corner. I'm going to kind of loop it around. Come on this side. Push that down. You can see that I've got my spline in place. I'm going to just hold it here. I'm not applying a lot of tension. I'm just kind of holding it in place. I'm making sure that just leaving the spline alone. Make sure it's not twisted. Now I'm going to make my final turn. I'm just holding that mesh in place to this corner. Now I'm going to take my knife very carefully without cutting the mesh. I've got to cut that spline. And now I've got to insert that spline back in there so it doesn't create an edge where it's just going to come undone all the time. And now I'm going to cut the excess mesh that's sticking up. You always want to keep your knife blade pointed away from the inside of the mesh. I kind of do a little 45-degree angle. With my other hand, I will pull as I cut. Again, noticing I'm not cutting to the inside part of the screen frame. Then when I get here, I just kind of do a little wiggle, and that side is done. Then I'm going to repeat up here. I'm pulling the mesh as I'm cutting. So actually the pulling is creating the cutting, and then the final cut. So let's say that we have some hardware that rolls into the mesh and you forgot to put the hardware in, or you needed to move it. Very popular with loop latches, where it has to go onto a ball head screw. Anything small like this, like an electronic tool, would work fine. The spline that we use is hollow. If you have to get in there and move anything, is you can just insert the edge of this into the spline groove and pull up. I'm going to find this cut edge, and I'm just going to lift it up. If I needed to slide this one way or another, or take it out, or put a new one in, there, I just put it in, and then I just take my spline tool again. Now I can just roll that right back in place. And now we have put together a knockdown version of a window screen frame ready to go.